Donald Trump desapareció. Y sí, Donald Trump ya no está en público, nadie lo ha visto. Nadie sabe si es porque ya se quedó sin nada que hacer, como por ejemplo destruir el jardín de rosas de la Casa Blanca, dañar el ala este de la Casa Blanca para convertirlo en un salón de baile de 200 millones de dólares, o simplemente desapareció porque su salud se encuentra tan mal que no quiere que nadie lo vea. Pero sea cual sea la razón, Donald Trump ha sido el presidente que más enfocado en que lo escuchen, más enfocado en que sea visible, prácticamente ha sido un presidente / influencer. Y lo interesante e irónico es que desapareció ahora de inmediato, justo en medio de esta crisis tan fea. Actualmente hemos visto fotos de Donald Trump saliendo a la luz que simplemente empeoran todo. Ahora, antes de entrar en estas fotos que, como te digo, arruinan todo, creo que Caroline Leavitt, ya sabes, la vocera de Donald Trump, tiene algo que ver con todo esto. Quiero empezar con una pequeña publicación de una pelea que hubo con una persona cercana a Donald Trump. Una publicación en Twitter de una broma sobre la posibilidad de que eso hubiera pasado, y Laura Loomer, ex amante de Donald Trump y quizás su asesora más cercana, dijo que deberían reportar en masa dicha cuenta por incitación a la violencia. Obviamente esto era una broma en Twitter, pero creo que ascendió más de lo que debió haber ascendido. Y a Laura Loomer evidentemente no le gustó esto para nada, porque lo alejaría más de su amante favorito Donald Trump. Lo cual creo que si lo demandaron a él, probablemente me puedan demandar a mí, así que en vez de decir eso, voy a decir presuntamente. ¿Qué te parece? Parece que la única forma de llamar la atención de estas personas, de estos dirigentes, es haciéndoles bromas, porque ellos no escuchan al pueblo, ellos no escuchan a nadie que no los afecte. Como te digo, solo escuchan a las personas que lo afectan porque no les gusta que nadie hable mal de ellos. Pero antes de llegar a personas como estas, personas que están en la cumbre del liderazgo de la administración de Donald Trump, quiero empezar con un señor que ha estado denunciando todo esto desde el día 1, y este es Lauren O'Donnell. Él tiene un mensaje muy importante justo aquí. Mira por favor.
Well, if Donald Trump gets dementia, how will we know? Donald Trump's mental decline, which is more and more obvious, started from such a low level of mental processing power that it's hard to track his decline. It's from low to lower. And then there are days like today when Donald Trump asks himself out loud in public if he is allowed to appoint himself chair of the Federal Reserve. Now, it may be tiresome to hear, but we must not grow weary of making the point that no other president was ever capable of saying anything as stupid or as indicative of dementia as that. Am I allowed to appoint myself chair of the Federal Reserve? And we must not grow weary of reminding ourselves what the White House press corps would have done if Joe Biden ever said anything like that, and how big the headlines would be in the next day's print editions of the New York Times and the Washington Post and every newspaper in the country, because if we grow weary of making the point of how singularly stupid and possibly clinically demented Donald Trump's statements are, then we will become part of the normalization process of those statements, which most of the American news media has unwittingly participated in, and 14-year-olds in this country will think it's perfectly normal for a president to say those things. And on a day when the President of the United States is reportedly in a meeting in the Situation Room where he is trying to decide how much to support or fully join a war that he opposed a week ago, it must be reported as part of that very same story.
Lauren O'Donnell ha sido el único que ha tenido la capacidad de hablar claramente sobre el deterioro cognitivo de Donald Trump y ha tratado de motivar a los demás para que puedan seguir hablando de esto. Ellos se ríen y dicen, jaja, Donald Trump es Donald Trump. Pero lo que vemos cada día más son señales obvias de que Donald Trump se encuentra en un declive cognitivo. Aún así, lo que pasa es muy importante y es que los medios no quieren cubrir nada de esto. Esa es la razón por la que Twitter hace unas noches estaba tan agitada. No habíamos tenido ninguna cobertura sobre Donald Trump. Pasaron literalmente 3 días sin saber nada de esto hasta que pasó la mañana siguiente, que pudimos ver fotos de Donald Trump saliendo hacia un campo de golf. Que esto de verdad, en vez de beneficiarlo, termina empeorándolo aún más. Estas dos fotos, una de Donald Trump caminando hacia su auto y otra de él aparentemente extendiendo la mano para saludar a alguien, fueron publicadas por el grupo de prensa de la Casa Blanca. Han sido compartidas, han sido filtradas y simplemente no se ve bien. Se ve como derritiéndose, todo embadurnado. Esta obviamente no es una buena imagen, simplemente no es para nada agradable de ver. A mí me sorprende y yo le agradezco a Dios que no he recibido por ahora ninguna amenaza ni ningún acto de algún republicano o alguien dentro del poder republicano pidiendo que ya no haga estos videos. Pero no me voy a cansar de decirlo, Donald Trump se encuentra en un declive cognitivo innegable. No importa cuánto maquillaje te pongas, no importa cómo trates de actuarlo, Donald Trump no está bien, ni física ni mentalmente. Por más que Donald Trump trate de ocultarlo, como lo ha hecho con la cara, con tantas cirugías, que aún así es muy obvio de verlo. Es muy notorio en el cuerpo que tienes por la pésima alimentación que llevas. Y de hecho hablar de esto solo genera imágenes nada agradables de ver, ni de imaginar. Pero claro, después de 3 días sin hacer nada y escondiéndote de la prensa, Donald Trump va a jugar golf. Qué grandioso, ¿no? El presidente de Estados Unidos. ¿En qué gasta su tiempo? ¿En qué gasta el dinero de los contribuyentes? Pues en ir a jugar golf, en promocionar eso y simplemente en desconectarse. Porque sí, jugar golf es lo único que hace Donald Trump cada que tiene tiempo libre. Por eso, actualmente yo propongo que los medios, cada vez que tengan la oportunidad de dialogar, de entrevistar a Donald Trump, le hagan preguntas contundentes. Que le pregunten sobre cosas que de verdad sirvan, como el caso de Jeffrey Epstein, los aranceles, la economía. ¿Por qué Donald Trump desapareció tanto tiempo? ¿Por qué Donald Trump no quiere comentar que tiene un verdadero deterioro cognitivo, un deterioro físico? ¿Por qué? Y de hecho ya empecé que habló muy bien de esto y me encantaría que vea su clip, por favor, mira.
So Congress is set to come back Tuesday after more than a month on recess, a recess that, don't forget, was called early because Republicans were too afraid to vote on a resolution demanding the release of the Epstein files. Speaker Mike Johnson hoped that by the time they came back, the whole Epstein matter would just go away, be old news. But that hasn't exactly panned out. Because next week, Democrats and a handful of Republican allies will be ensuring that the Epstein story remains front and center. On Wednesday, Congressman Ro Khanna and Republican Thomas Massie will host a press conference featuring several survivors of Epstein and Maxwell's abuse. Those survivors plan to tell their stories, some for the first time in public, and will urge Congress to pass the bipartisan resolution to push the DOJ to release the files. And Democrats will press for more subpoenas, following the latest one issued by the House Oversight Committee to the Epstein estate for the birthday book that repeatedly bears Trump's signature. My colleague Chris Hayes spoke with Congressman Robert Garcia, the ranking Democrat on the committee, earlier this evening, where he broke some news about that birthday book.
We finally got word from the Epstein estate. They're going to be providing the actual Epstein book, that famous book where that note that Donald Trump drew and doodled to Jeffrey Epstein, his so-called best friend of 10 to 15 years.
So that's some news. Joining us now is Congressman Moskowitz, a Democrat from Florida. Congressman, thank you for being here with me. So Congress is back next week. I mean, as I just noted, the story of the Epstein files is really, to me, it's about what Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell did to the victims. They're going to be speaking out next week at a press conference, as I just mentioned. What impact do you hope their stories will have?
Well, obviously, look, victims of sexual abuse, their stories are powerful. They're their stories, and no one should politicize them. Let the American people hear from the victims and let them tell their truth. And we'll see how the American people digest it. Look, Democrats are going to continue to remain focused on this. Not just this, we'll remain focused on this and affordability, which I think is the #1 issue for the American people. But we also can't, stay focused on 20 things that Trump has done in the last 20 minutes. Otherwise, none of the messages that we want to get through will resonate. But there are lots of questions, right? We went on break and all of a sudden Trump's former attorney went to the jail and interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell, right? Created a transcript, which then got released. She then got transferred to a different facility. I noticed when that happened, Jen, that the leaks to the newspapers stopped. And so there are lots of questions here. And of course, James Comer says, most transparent administration in American history. They've released 33,000 pages of information. 97% of that information was already public. My dear friend James would know that. He reads on a 7th grade level. But, nothing that has happened, over the last couple of weeks is to get to the truth. It is literally just to try to get the American people off of this issue. Everything you have seen and watched, the show that has been going on, troops in D.C., right? The stuff going on with Putin, everything you've seen to fill your TV screen, everything they've done is to try to get you focused off of the Epstein issue.
I could not agree with you more. And that's why it's so interesting when Congress comes back. Clearly, there's going to be a lot of pushes on this. One of the things that's been sort of interesting, I mean, Comer was a little slow to move forward with the subpoenas, at least in my view. You may or may not agree. I mean, he obviously supported them. But
no, that's actually his regular, Jen, that's actually his regular speed.
Oh, yeah, no.
He's just a little slow in general, so.
Oh, well, okay. There you go. I wasn't even saying that, but I'll let you say it. Okay. What I was going to ask you about is he didn't include Alex Acosta, who's obviously a key player here, but he then did include him. And now there's going to be a transcribed interview with Alex Acosta happening in September. What questions do you hope he answers? What do you think we could learn from that?
Well, we got to ask about the sweetheart deal. Why did he get a sweetheart deal? Who called him? Did he ever speak to anyone? Was he ever directed? We got to get those questions. I also think they need to bring in Christopher Wray. I've heard that Christopher Wray has seen what's in those files. And so I find it interesting that they've not brought in the former FBI director who had access to these files for a long period of time. There's other people that we could be bringing in rather than the folks that Comer is bringing in. He's bringing in, former elected officials. Comer wants to know, why he's plugged in the auto pen into the wall, but the auto pen won't speak to him. And so, if we really want to get to the bottom of this, Alex Acosta is actually a good witness to bring in, but also Chairman Comer should have a hearing. Why is he doing all of this in the basement of a building, with no TV cameras? Is he going to have a hearing? Is he going to bring any of these folks to a hearing to get asked questions? The American people can see it. Or is he just going to issue his own one-sided report? I mean, the American people want transparency. He should have a hearing. What's he afraid of?
Well, it's a good question. I hope you keep asking it next week. Okay, let me ask you another piece, because you're right. I mean, costs and the economy is what is on the minds of people across the country. We got news earlier this evening that a federal court has declared most of President Trump's tariffs to be unconstitutional, but has allowed them to stay in place for now. It's going to go to the Supreme Court. But what's your take on that?
Well, obviously, this has been a big debate, whether the tariff policy was reserved for Congress and whether the president has the ability to do these sweeping tariffs, right? Most of Congress has maintained that this power is with the legislative branch. And so this ruling that came out is now paused until October 14th. The Supreme Court is going to weigh in. And Jen, this will be another test to see if the Supreme Court is going to continue to make the president all powerful and continue to erode power away from the legislative branch or away from other institutions and agencies.
Esto, de la misma forma que la salud de Donald Trump, es un tema que no se va a acabar y que tenemos que continuar investigando. Pero bueno, yo cumplí con mi misión, que es informarte como lo hago todos los días. Como siempre te digo, para mí lo más importante es tu opinión y me encantaría que la pongas en los comentarios. Además, si te gusta el contenido de política estadounidense, te va a encantar suscribirte al canal, ya que subo videos todos los días. Mi nombre es José Alvarado, soy economista y estoy comprometido con informarte diariamente. Nos vemos en el siguiente video. Adiós.